The Arnolfini Portrait by Jan Van Eyck is among the finest portraits from European art history, right up there with the likes of Da Vinci's Mona Lisa. To this day, it remains quite fascinating, giving more questions than answers, like who is this man? Why does he look like Vladimir Putin? Is this proof of time travel? A Nostradamus-like prediction, perhaps? It would be rude to ignore these propositions right away. After all, art is subjective, and the Arnolfini portrait has garnered as many different interpretations as the collective imagination of art historians could conjure. So let's dive into Jan Van Eyck's beguiling masterpiece and the plethora of interpretations that have followed in its wake. The double portrait was painted in 1434, presumably in the Flemish city of Bourse. It is one of the world's most recognizable works of art today, and for good reason. Where do we even start here? Well, how about the subjects? For the longest time, it was believed that the portrait depicted Giovanni di Arrigo Arnolfini and his wife, Jeanne de Senaim. But recently, discoveries have shown that they married each other in 1447, almost 13 years after the portrait was painted, not to mention almost 6 years after the painter's death. Now, historians think that the man in the portrait is actually the cousin of the previous dude, Giovanni di Niccolao Arnolfini. As you can see, the facial features seem similar to the man in the Arnolfini portrait standing beside his wife, Costanza Trenta. Oh no, what a letdown. Bourse in those days was at the heart of European commercial activity, and merchants from all over Europe came to try their luck. Arnolfini was no different. He was a merchant from the small city of Lucca in Tuscany, Italy, and his family was involved in politics and trade, especially the expensive clothing and textile business. He spent most of his life in Flanders. Suffice to say, he was no chump. Just look at the man's house: silk sheets, elaborately carved mirrors, and brass chandeliers. Like in the early days of the Italian Renaissance, rampant consumerism and trade gave birth to an affluent middle class in Bourse, as wealthy, if not more, than the aristocrats. The merchants were put in a precarious social position. They had to skirt a fine line to avoid political issues. Jan Van Eyck was a court painter, aware of the social content, so he probably guided the couple away from offending the nobles. And yet, the portrait is filled with unabashed displays of wealth. Look at the woman's green dress. She holds most of it up with her left hand, and still the long, lavish garment trails towards us on the floor. The overlapping layers of fabric, known as dagging, frame the flowing dress against her figure. It would have required expensive wool and fur, the ultimate luxury item of the time, to create the dress, and dyeing the vivid palette of green would have required hours of labor. The man wears a tabard of silk velvet, not too shabby. The portrait becomes a sort of brand commercial for Arnolfini's business. But that's not all. For a long time, art historians thought that the innocent embrace of the hands in the middle and the pregnancy implied a marriage. Modern consensus adds some detail to this reading. 1. The woman is not pregnant. Weird as it might seem, portraying women with a puffed belly was fashionable to denote fertility. On top of that, no pun intended, the portrait was probably commissioned a year after the passing of Costanza. So it is a marriage portrait, but it represents a past marriage. If this hypothesis is true, Van Eyck would have had to draw the female figure by either his own memory or his client's. A demanding feat. Here's where things start to get interesting. Now that we know the woman is not pregnant, or alive, we can move freely around the frame. Let's start from the right, the red bed. The presence of the bed may deceive you into thinking that they are in the bedroom. It seems like an appropriate place for such a personal subject. But we are not in the bedroom. It was common practice to place a luxurious bed near the entrance as decoration, once again projecting mercantile wealth. How about the Persian rug below? And look at the illustrious detail with which the bed's fabric and the carpet's skin are rendered. The painter complements this blood red with the lush green dress. How vigorous and lush they feel. Also, notice that they fall on the right side of the image, on the side of the deceased, as if her memory is a source of jubilation. While the surfaces are just as tactile and textured on the left, they do not possess the vibrancy and color of the other side. The man's stoic, almost devotional pose, especially with the right hand, and the dark clothing color, tells the story of his grief. While the woman stands close to the bed, to the instrument of repose, the man stands closer to the window, which brings the outside world in through noise and chatter. He can even look out at any moment to see the hustle of the city, both sound and sight being passive interactions, the sort that would benefit a grieving man. If we sneak out of the window, we see a cherry tree, another symbol of mortality since cherry blossoms bloom for a short time. But the painter does not leave the husband out to dry. The crowned glass at the top brings colors and light into the room, signifying hope. There are oranges on the windowsill, an expensive fruit for the time. The theme of wealth and mortality continues to run parallel, wealth falling short in front of the great equalizer. If you look closely, the orange light reflects onto the left wall. Such technical virtuoso is rare for its era. Still life studies became popular in Europe a century later, and you have to wonder if Van Eyck provided the initial impetus with such small flourishes. If we continue from the oranges and move further down the painting, we can see the wooden shoes of Arnolfini, which look almost Japanese but were quite common. The dirt on the shoes further reminds us of the presence of life for the grieving man. He has to go out and interact with the people. He has to engage with the material world tangibly, something the departed cannot manage. In the middle of the frame, you can also see Constanza's shoes, once again bubbling with color. Shoes in art often signify the sanctity of marriage, and if you look at the bottom of the frame, you can see a dog sitting at the wife's feet, where shoes typically are. Dogs can be seen in medieval and ancient tombs, as they were believed to uphold their loyalty to the end, journeying with and keeping their master company in the afterlife. Now that we are at the bottom of the frame, let us not miss the forest for the trees. Sit back and take a look at the entire painting. I'm sure you've got it. The composition, with its orthogonal perspective, yields itself to us. The floor at the bottom provides depth to the image. It feels as if one can walk in on the image. Ernst Gombrich, author of The Story of the Art, thought, quote, "A simple corner of the real world had suddenly been fixed on to a panel, as if by magic." He added that Van Eyck had become the perfect eyewitness in the truest sense of the term. This remark makes the painting seem like a photograph. And it's easy to see why. Let us address the elephant in the room, the mirror at the back. Jan Van Eyck toyed with us way before Brecht's acknowledgement and sacrilege of the fourth wall. The mirror invites us in just as much as the spare room at the bottom of the canvas, the receding or approaching floor, whichever way you want to look at it. The mirror opens the space up by, ironically, condensing it. It almost turns a simple painting into something similar to VR content. And it was a conscious choice since mirrors did not used to be this big. Squint hard enough, and you might just be able to make out two figures in the mirror. One could be the painter himself, since he did not shy to let his presence known. As Latin inscription above the mirror tells us, Van Eyck was here, 1434. But who is the second figure? Perhaps it's you, the viewer. Once you start moving away from the mirror, you can really understand Gombrich's praise, because coming out of the mirror, we catch a glimpse of the roundels around it, each one telling an episode from the life of Jesus. You can start reading it from the bottom and continue to the left. The tale begins with a congregation with the disciples, and when it gets to the top, we witness the crucifixion. The continuation on the right follows the descent from the cross and reckoning with his sacrifice until he is resurrected at the bottom. The continuation on the right follows the descent from the cross and reckoning with his sacrifice until he is resurrected at the bottom. The compositional dichotomy of life and death is still present, even in the minute details. Should we keep moving out, we can also notice the amber, a gift appropriate for a marriage ceremony, prodigious detailing as the light passes through each bead. You can almost see the light glazing off the surface. Van Eyck applied several layers of translucent glaze to render the glowing highlights perfectly. You can even see it in the chandelier above. You might also notice that only 2 of the 6 candle spots are used. On the left side, the candle is burning as you'd expect. The candle on the right has gone out, the wax reminding us that it once burned bright. All these minor, careful details jumping out of a panel of just 32 by 23 inches. How can one not admire it? The remarkable thing about the Arnolfini portrait is how aptly it ties various strands of socio-political and personal history with pure artistic wizardry. Its mystery, technical precision, and sheer ambition continue to attract interest even today. Historically, the county of Flanders, the Dutch region to the north of France, was a breeding ground for artistic and commercial aspirations in the 14th and 15th centuries. The early Netherlandish painting is seen as a precursor to the Northern Renaissance that heavily influenced the European arts in the late 15th and 16th centuries. Needless to say, Jan Van Eyck played a major role in that transformation. How do you interpret the Arnolfini portrait? Do you think it deals with themes of mortality and loyalty, or are we reading too much into it? Let us know in the comments. Also, if you like the video, don't forget to like and subscribe. That's it for now. See you in the next one.